All right, we'll start. Michael is the head of the EPC's operations, basically, and leads that. He is a teaching pastor at Downtown Church. He has been a football player, a banker. He's not much of a runner. He doesn't know what to wear when he runs. But many other things he's excellent at. He's married to Serena and has 3 boys, one who's friends with my youngest, MJ, Elijah, and Titus. But most of all, his most distinctive thing about him is he loves Jesus. And even though he has about 3 jobs, he's here to tell you more about him and how wisdom at work can drive you. So, Michael?
One of the things that when we look at the text that we'll read is really looking at part of the Sermon on the Mount and reading some of James to help to understand how God uses wisdom in areas of work. James, if you know anything about the book of James, he's writing to a dispersion. Hey, Tay-Tay. Of Jews, and the dispersion of Jews, he is sitting on a council and trying to give direction to a Jewish nation that is dispersed upon all of the land. And when you understand what he does, he has to tell them how to operate and function in an agrarian culture where they could take advantage and were taking advantage of others in terms of work. They didn't know how to appropriately interact with different cultures, etc., in terms of how they were going to live and sustain that living, etc. And so when James talks about wisdom, I don't want us to think of it as an abstract way in which we live. In fact, I believe, and Zach Eswine, who's a pastor in St. Louis, has a good way of kind of putting this. I believe the way that we've looked at the threefold office of Jesus, it's only been prophet, priest, and king. You've heard that before, right? Many of you've heard that before. So prophet, meaning that he's primarily proclaiming the good news of the good news and preaching, etc. Priest, carrying out the duties of a priest within a particular community, etc. Shepherding, sacraments, and then king is rule. It's the rule and reign, and I think we emphasize a lot of how we lead with ruling. But then wisdom is more sage, and that's where when we learn how Jesus is using wisdom, in fact, in a culture that wisdom is held to a high degree, we emphasize truth due to our interactions due to the Enlightenment, let's say it that way. So if you ever think about how we structure things, our school systems, etc., the way we think, it's very much in regards to how the Enlightenment period and philosophers and the way of thinking was actually appropriated. But Jesus, when they talk about wisdom in this context, rhetoric was based a lot around not so much of objective or subjective truth, but actually what is the best way to do something, to understand something. And so I will provide through the Sermon on the Mount what I believe is one of the most wise ways that we seek God for help in our work, in our family, in our life, and seek wisdom for that. One king who prayed, which I always think was a very important prayer, was King Solomon. Remember when King Solomon was about to rule, what did he pray for? Wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. And you remember the first issue that came to him? 2 women with a baby. And so if you use, I'm not gonna go back and forth to the thing because this lapel might get me nervous. But if you, don't worry about it, don't worry. But if you think about if he just primarily went off of behavior motivation, he went off of emotion, or he went off of whatever truth that one could debate and make and convince, he wouldn't use wisdom. You see what I'm saying? And wisdom requires you to use a lot at your disposal to understand and operate, but it's not formulaic every time. And that's the key thing when it becomes being a Christian at work. Whenever I get to pray with my team, when we pray, I'll let us know that we have the opportunity to pray to the God of all wisdom to give us direction. We don't have to be ashamed of that. And in doing so, we can live gracefully with one another as opposed to living suspiciously with one another. That's a very key thing, because many of us and you who have been in corporate settings, who have been in various sectors, marketplaces, medical fields, etc., wherever you've been, you've had to operate in a way that sometimes, if the company is not healthy, if the team is unhealthy, there's a level of suspicion that's unhealthy for you, and it causes a whole lot of anxiety, causes a whole lot of frustration, and it also makes you overthink. Okay, so I just wanted to set that up there, because when we read a couple passages, I'm going to ask you some questions and ask for some dialogue and feedback. Okay, so let me read. Let me start at Genesis chapter 1. We have any readers? I would ask, would somebody read Genesis chapter 1, starting at verse 26 and reading down to verse 31. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. And I'll read, start at verse chapter 2. It says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done." And then going over to Matthew chapter 7. Somebody turn to Matthew chapter 7, verse 7 through 11. Matthew 7 through 11. "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, it will be opened. Or which one of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent. If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Absolutely. So I want to ask the question first. When you hear Genesis chapter 1, what do you hear in terms of work? Dominion? Story, yeah. Say it again. Creation story. You say crazy story? Creation story. Okay, that's it's in this particular passage in Genesis, it's called the cultural mandate, right? And in the mandate or creation mandate, in the mandate, what you have is a responsibility, and the responsibility is to work. Now, work looks different for some of us, but if we were talking to a farmer today, I want you to think about how much wisdom they would need in order to continue to carry out the business that they have. And now there's a whole lot more technology in farming systems, and so for them it is easier than it was previously. But I want you to connect it. I always try to make the text, I want the text to come alive to where we are when it comes to work, because we can kind of, I want us to understand the context, but I also want to see the applicability for modern day. And so the reason I say that is because when you think about people who have to rely on rain, sun, but then have no way in order to technology in order to know what things are happening, the reason they worship rain, the moon, the sun, various different things, was because they thought that was a way in which they could get more, we would put it today, capital for their gain to live, right? So that means more flourishing in their farmland and amongst their cattle. But if there is desolation, if there are locusts in the Exodus story that comes and eat up all of their grains, etc., then what do they have to rely on? Right? It would almost be as if your business goes bankrupt and you have no job tomorrow, or you walk up and there's a close sign, or you're fired the next day. What do you do? Some of us have plans, etc. But that's wisdom that's caused you to have a plan. And so for them, think about how much wisdom they needed in order to adapt to where we are. We have titles now like adaptive leadership, right? That causes us to think about how we interact. And we also have other titles like emotional intelligence in our leadership. If I were to ask you, how would you feel if you lost everything? Right? You would feel mad, sad, glad, or some of the emotions that are out there. But sometimes we can disavow ourselves of those emotions when we're in our workplace because of how we think that we need to function as human beings. But wisdom says you're fully human. Therefore, you don't need to dismiss who you are as a human in order to operate where you are, right? The level of toxicity that tells you don't be human at work is not wise, because that's what leads a lot of people into depression and other mental health issues, etc. So if you can track where I'm going, God has created us for work, for Him, and He's given us the ability to recognize the wisdom in which He's afforded us for us to do work. But when we look at our passage in Matthew, you may say, what does this have to do with wisdom? Where's this? How's this connect? What does He ask them to do? What does He say that one should do? You're supposed to ask, okay? What else? Seek, and what else? Okay, give. I hear you. That's good. So when you hear this passage, why do you think God is asking for you to ask, seek, knock, to even give of oneself in some way? Why do you think that it is good that one does such? Connecting it to your work. Okay? And how so?
Because we'll receive.
Because we will receive it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. What else?
Fundamentally dependent.
We're fundamentally dependent on them. Absolutely. We're not totally independent. Absolutely. But we know the contrast of that is to say that we are independent, right? Right? Which goes back to the fact that always like to use Genesis 1, how can we be independent when we were created? Now somebody may have other arguments around that, whatever case may be, but yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And why does that humility need to come before you walk into your office, before you rise up and go about your way, before you walk into the next appointment and have the next meeting, when you're frustrated, you're angry, you know that there's confrontation, you don't like confrontation. You hate having to give the bad news. So sometimes some people could, if depending on where you are, they can make you the person to give the bad news and you hate it, or you could give it off on someone else to give the bad news. But how does this passage help you to walk and understand wisely how to navigate a situation like that? Yes. Yes.
And to know I'm not supposed to be able to handle it on my own.
Yes.
It's repetitive on purpose. Ask, seek, knock, keep going, keep going.
Absolutely. Those words are present imperatives. And so when you're parsing those words out, what that means is that a present imperative is a continual ask, a continuing seeking, a continuous knocking. And the idea there is for us to know in a very wise way, because you got to think about the passage right in 7 verse 1. He says, "Judge not that you may not be judged, for with judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with that measure you use it will be measured to you." You're just like, wait a minute, I can't walk in having the mentality in this meeting that this person is automatically and absolutely wrong in every way, because I know that I could be in that situation. That's wisdom. Then wisdom affords you the ability to empathize. So everyone is not an enemy, and you then can be the very individual that gives grace no matter the news that you have. Right? So the Lord can help you calm your nerves and walk into team meetings and walk into hard things and using wisdom, knowing that hard things will be hard things. That's inevitable. Right? So then the reason this teaching, and the reason I emphasize the wisdom, because when you look at the passage in the Sermon on the Mount, and we'll read James here in a little bit, right at the end where it talks about authority of Jesus, once again, we emphasize a lot of this from the aspect of like truth, objective truth, subjective truth. I want you to look at what he says here when he says, "And when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes." One who has authority and not as their scribes. Why do you think it's important that Jesus teaches with authority in a culture, in a context that has a high degree of appreciation for wisdom in its literature, in its rhetoric, etc.? And think about how Jesus teaches. Once again, we think about teaching in an outline format where you have to kind of go list by list, thing by thing, etc. Jesus uses wisdom in stories. He uses wisdom in story. Whenever I tell a story, it grabs your attention. When I tell you a story about my son and how when we went swimming at one point in time and I was trying to navigate having him feel fearless in a situation where he was completely fearful. But from his vantage point, the pool probably looked like the ocean when he was 18 months. But from my vantage point, 3 feet felt, it was nothing. I won't drown in 3 feet. But when he had the life jacket on, when he had the device around him, when I tell you a story of how the device and how it protected him and what it meant, but then I tell you another story how we all fell off jet skis and he's forever traumatized and what that meant and how I had to trust when I was trying to tell him when he was 18 months to trust the life jacket that he was on, it was my wife when we fell off of jet skis to tell me, Mike, let him go and trust the life jacket that he had on, because I was holding my son while going underwater. Right? And I tell you truths from that story. What happens is you begin to take the wisdom out of that story and apply it in your life. Jesus does this right here in chapter 7. And we're going to go to James. I want you to look at what he says. You won't, or which one of you, on verse 9, or which one of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Now, if I were to translate that and say, which one of you would give the lowest of lows or pay the lowest of lows to any of your employees? Or what any of you would make a deal that would not be to the benefit of your respective client or partner, etc., and you would put them in a bad situation versus and making yourself more wealthy? Would you give them bread? Would you give them a stone? Whatever the stone, what would a stone be? I want you to think about that for a moment in terms of what you give at work. Because if we were to be honest, a lot of times we have given stones. If we would be completely honest, we have given stones. And it's okay. It's just about recognizing that we're not perfect. That we humble ourselves and say, yeah, I know that when it comes to my child, I may want to give them the bread or whatever. But when it comes to somebody that's not my blood relative, I may not give them the best. And then look at the question that he asks. Again, it's rhetorical, right? Or if he asks for a fish, will you give him a serpent? Now, I always I'm a pastor, so when you see words being used, what does a serpent tie us to? Right? Right back at Genesis chapter 1. Every time when you're reading, it's almost like when you have oral tradition where you want to hear something that's repetitive that reminds you of why the main thing is the main thing or the purpose of the thing. It's the same thing when you do at your job when you're creating culture or when you're having to lead and create values. You want to make sure that the same words are coming up in the same titles and the same phrases so people can catch on. Well, here Jesus is trying to have them to see, would you give them a fish? Or would you give them the very thing that was a problem from the beginning? What would you do? And then he says, if you then, who are evil, so assuming that we already have this sin in our heart, who are evil know how to give good gifts. You who got sin in your heart that's not even perfect, you know how to give good gifts. How do we know? Because Christmas, anniversaries, birthdays. You know how to give gifts, good gifts. Administrative Assistance Day. Your boss day. There's a lot of days that we celebrate oftentimes that we forget. We know how to give good gifts. Right? What are good gifts that you've given? Yes, promotions. Absolutely. What else?
Encouragement. Yeah.
Good.
So they're not all material. I mean, it can be your time.
Yes.
You know?
Absolutely. Good. Absolutely. Absolutely. What other good?
Kids always want something material.
Absolutely. It's never enough.
According to that information, no, it's very hard. You're a great child.
I want you to think about this. I want to talk about it from a generational perspective as well, because I like the room that it's diverse generationally. Sage doesn't mean that you're out of the way. Right? I think in our culture we have a big generational shift that needs to happen. Right? And it needs to happen because if you look, boomers have been leading for generations, for a couple of generations. And those that are millennials or Gen Xers, and then you got the next generation, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, there is this idea that there needs to be a good marrying between boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials to help with the wisdom on how to lead for the future. But can I tell you something? It doesn't look like making a caricature of a younger generation, or a younger generation making a caricature of the older generation. When I sit at a table, because I'm around a lot of more seasoned individuals, let's say it that way, I remember sitting at a meeting, and they were talking about younger people, and they were like, yeah, these younger people these days and the internet. And I just had to say, I was like, you realize the younger people didn't create the internet. It wasn't the younger people. Right? It would always be like me saying about my generation, about Generation Alpha or my son, yeah, these kids in TikTok. They didn't create TikTok. And here's why I think that this is important. Because the wisdom that we have, we can either use it for evil, or the gifts that we have can use it for evil, or we can continue to use it for good. That is the wisdom, the experience, the talents, all of the intangibles that we can share and cross-pollinate amongst generations to help us actually lead in our work a lot better, on our teams a lot better. To be the way that we think about, we use the word inclusive leadership, building people and teams around more voices and empowering them who are in the room, and not only thinking that people who have a certain level of experience are the only individuals that can speak into something. There are times that I bring my assistant into conversations because I want her wisdom. I want her insight. I want her input. I know she has something good to offer. The text teaches me that, because what it says is, if I trust in myself a whole lot more and think that my experience, my education, and what I think is supreme and superior, then I would not humble myself and acknowledge that I have biases and I have blind sides, etc., that this other individual can actually help and assist me and further as I continue to lead. Does that make sense? Y'all tracking with me?
100%.
Okay? So then God says to give good gifts to your children. So he makes it personal, but there are ways in which we can see it. I was trying to see it outside of that, but he says, because he's our Father, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to you who ask? So when you need the wisdom, when you need to understand how to make hard decisions, why would God help you? Why wouldn't he give you guidance and direction? Why wouldn't he meet you in a moment where you're most frustrated, when you're overwhelmed? Why wouldn't he do that? He's the giver. This is where James comes into play. He's the giver of good gifts. James chapter 1, it says this, starting in verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God. If you lack it, if you don't know what you don't know, because some of us have had to use the fake it till you make it approach. The gospel, our Bibles don't teach us to fake it till you make it. The authority in which Jesus has actually tells us, and what he fulfills in his teaching actually says we don't have to fake it. He will actually intervene and give us what we need in the time in which we need it. How do we know it? Because James, who's the brother of Jesus, actually, if you ever have time in your devotional time, read the book of James and the Sermon on the Mount, at the same time. And see how James uses the teaching to lead an entire nation that is dispersed and divided, scattered abroad. And what he says here, he says, let him ask who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith. Everybody say faith.
Faith.
Why is faith important when it comes to asking God for wisdom? Not in a prosperity gospel kind of way. A lot of times when we talk about believing and receiving, immediately we go to a prosperity gospel. I can tell you right now, I think the new prosperity gospel it's more so your influence, right? If you have influence and you don't steward it well, what happens is you use it only for yourself. Use it only to build up yourself and making you more prosperous. So that is a gospel that we can slowly begin to allow ourselves to let it creep in and navigate the way we lead our businesses or our teams or go into jobs and work. We could absolutely have that mentality. But here's where faith is very important, because it actually goes against without doubting. That's what the text sets us up. He says, let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubt is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. So I had to deal with a situation where I had to write up an incident report. And in writing up an incident report, I had to write it to somebody that I supervised. And in writing that incident report, they came back to me, and this is how they spoke to me. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing. Here's some advice on how we could do this in the future. Now, here's what I have to rely on: the wisdom not to respond in a way that says that my authority is more supreme than you, and I can use it in this moment to actually trample you, right? And in that situation, I can't pause time and just like calm myself down. How would you feel if somebody said that to you? When you're trying to, the incident report was against another team member, and I'm having to address it, and instead of seeing where he had offended someone else, all he could see is how he could use it as a teachable moment for me. Y'all see what I'm saying? And so how would you feel if somebody tried to correct you in a moment in which you're trying to help them? How would you feel?
Furious.
You furious? What do you say?
He's scratching my head.
You know what I had to do? I had to apply wisdom. I really did. Because here's the example, James chapter 4, where you could really, if you read from James chapter 4 to James chapter 5, you'll see how those who had authority, who had power, took advantage of it. And so these warnings and these fights and these quarrels, James is trying to use wisdom in order to navigate and give people guidance on how to do this. So I had to go into this. Let me say this: I had to go into the meeting, and I had to ask God, give me wisdom to navigate, because I knew what was going to come. And I had to have faith that God will give me the words to say, that will give me the patience and the grace to overcome any opposition. That required me to have a level of that. Sometimes what we can do is not trust or foresee any of those issues and only rely on ourselves and rely on our abilities or our past experience. And wisdom says every situation is not the same, right? Every situation is not the same. And so every human is going to respond differently. So when we read this, I want you to hear. I'm gonna start at verse 13 of chapter 4. Come now, you who today or tomorrow will go into such a town and spend a year there and trade and make profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist, some texts will say a vapor, that appears for a little time and then vanish. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows what the right thing to do, whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. What do you hear in that passage? Yeah, don't hold on too tightly. What else?
Be humble.
Humility.
Seeking our independence can be evil.
Yeah. Seeking our independence, absolutely. Could be evil.
Well,
Yeah.
there's one way we
Absolutely.
boast is like, let me tell you what I told that guy. I told him this and this and this. I straightened him out.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. If I walk out of the meeting and I said, you know what, and I went to my boss and I said, you know what, I told this person that they shouldn't talk to me this way, nor should they have dealt with the other person this way, and I fired them. I didn't. Right? And that would be me using it. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing is, when we look at this, when he talks about going into such a town, spend a year there, trade and make profit. So you remember, they're having to take ships across the Mediterranean Sea. They're having to trade and use the marketplaces in various different areas. And as Jews are all over what is happening there, they have a certain air about themselves because of the tension within society, and they have a particular frustration as to what is going on with one another even. And so what he's saying is, do you understand that you spend a year in a town, in an area, and you build your wealth, you build your profit, but then, what do you think about life? Are you thinking about the entirety of life when it comes to when you're working? Are you thinking about how this applies overall to what you're doing? Lawyers, are you thinking about how when you walk into a case or when you deal with a client, or doctors, when you are walking into surgery, or finance people or construction workers or farmers, how are you thinking about the entirety of life? Not in a philosophical way necessarily. I don't think necessarily it's asking like a philosopher would ask, what is the meaning of life necessarily? But what is it? What is life in comparison to what you're making? Money, wealth, or what's being promoted? What is that in connection to it? What y'all know what it connects to? What's the Bible say that we can do? What we can't take anything out of this, or everything. All things are temporal, right? All things are temporal. So when you think about that. It challenges us. It really challenges us, because our going to such a town is going to work every day on our daily commute. Who are we to go into work and only think about what we make and what we do and how important it is to us, and not all of life? Now I'm about to broaden it. All of life means, how can you drive downtown and drive past homeless people every single day and heart can't be broken? And wisdom doesn't say when you walk into the office, you can remind some of your people that everybody doesn't have everything that we have. And this could be gone tomorrow. It could be gone tomorrow. everything that I've saved for, everything that I've worked so hard for, it could be gone tomorrow. How do you feel about that? To your point, we work so hard for retirement. We work so hard at times to retire and to be we work so hard to be in a particular place in society in a particular time. And I want you to think about this. James is trying to disrupt the reality that if we work so hard to do something, be something, our boast only comes more clearly in the very thing that we desire. Now, connecting it again to a very pagan people. Like, we don't think about being pagans at times. We don't think about that. We use idolatry, which is fine, but we don't think about the things that we worship, right? And I believe that a big part of the wisdom piece is to understand. That's why I started with Genesis chapter 1. What time do I end, by the way?
Meeting ends at 8.
Meeting is 8. That's why I started with Genesis chapter 1, because here's the wisdom, beloved. It is that God created us and brought us into this world. So when James says this, do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variations or shadow due to change. Of his own will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. That's very important to understand, because what he alludes to is we don't drum up our own gifts, our own talents, our own wealth, our own security. We should live not fearful because of the God that we trust in, not the things that we trust in. If I say your homework would be this week, I want you to write down everything that you will be fearful of losing. And then when you write down everything that you're fearful of losing, write why you're fearful of losing it. And then ask yourself, who's giving me this? Have I credited myself every time that these things have happened? Do I worship myself for doing such a great job at where I am in life? Or do I recognize that I am a being that can be like a vapor, a mist, and everything could be gone tomorrow? And all I can do is continue to thank the God above, the Father in heaven, who without a doubt has provided for me every single day, hour, minute, and second of my life. So why do I then ask, seek, and knock perpetually? It is because I'm recognizing that if I do not ask, seek, and knock, then I am solely operating in my own ability and dependence separate from God. What does Paul say? Paul says God uses the foolish things in the world to shame the wise. He uses those that are noble and prestige to shame those that are wise and strong. You know what I like about sports a lot of times? Is sports help us to see that sometimes it's not always about being the strongest and the fastest. It's not always about having the best physique. When I went to play college football at Millikan University, I played Division III football for a couple years there. And when I did, we had to go out the first day and run these gassers, 100-yard gassers, right? And you know, skill positions, you run them in around 15 to 17 seconds, right? And then you got your linemen who are running a little bit longer, and they take they kind of take as much time as they can get down, right? But it was a guy I'll never forget. This guy's, his name is Jonathan Booker. I said to myself, he didn't do well on ACT because he should have been at Ohio State or something, Ohio State somewhere. He was a mass. He looked like The Rock. He was at our age, 18 years old. He was 6'3". He had to be 215 pounds. He took his shirt off. He was completely ripped. You could tell that this dude was just a monstrosity. And so I said, man, he has to be crazy on the field. And we get out there, we run, and he's killing all of the skill stuff. We get out there to practice, look like a baby. Ripping around him, coming around him. I'm just like, man, maybe it's an off day. Maybe that's what it is. He just have an off day today, he not performing. Day 2 come around, same thing. I'm like, golly, the way he looks, he should be far better than that. But I'm a better athlete than he is. It's not always God using those that we think are the strongest, the fastest, the smartest, and the wisest, according to what society says, according to what our jobs say, according to the benchmarks that are out there that we're trying to meet and that we're reading in Harvard Business Review, or that we're reading in some other article, review, or newspaper, or etc. These are the things where we have the secret, beloved, and why wisdom is so profound, because God does exceedingly and abundantly above every single thing that we can think or imagine. For all of creation, he exceeds it. Sometimes some of you are in here saying, I probably shouldn't be in the position that I am. I say that all the time to myself. I don't think I'm smart enough to be where I am, but God saw fit for something. I don't think I'm the best human to be a pastor, but God saw fit for something. I don't think that I am the best father, but God saw fit to give me 3 boys. I don't think I'm the best husband, but God saw fit to give me a wonderful, gracious, and beautiful wife. God provides so much for us. What happens is we live in light of the wisdom that he provides and faith that he gives instead of the doubts that creep in our hearts and our minds. And what are the doubts that creep in your hearts and minds? Remember, I asked you to write down that list of things that you're holding on tightly to. But then I want you to think about how that matches up with your doubts. Because doubt, have you ever asked and then doubted? You ever had your child ask you something, but then like they can't recant, they take it back because they're doubting. But it's sometimes, or a child has come to you, you want them to ask you for something at times because you want to provide for them, right? That's what he alludes to, where not giving them bread, or not giving them stone, or bread, not giving them a serpent over a fish. You want to give them good gifts, so you keep asking me, keep asking me. I want you to know that that's what God is saying. Keep asking me. As you drive down Poplar, or as you drive downtown, or if you're on the 240 loop, or as you're on a plane, or wherever you're going, God is saying, keep asking me. As you lead, keep asking me. Because I'm willing to provide. What y'all hear?
When we want to.
There you go. There you go. There you go. There you go. And that is believing in God. That's having faith that he is making the right provisions for you. He's closed the right doors. When I use the illustration of when we ask, seek, and knock, I'm saying sometimes when the door doesn't open, what we try to do is we try to pull out that shotgun and blow the door open. Right? Because we pulled. Don't say, okay, edit that.
It doesn't say that.
Oh, it doesn't say that. But we try to do that. That's what it's saying. But we are trying to do that at times. And exactly what it is, because of the want. It's not because we're trusting that God is making the provisions correctly according to his will for our lives.